Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about using ChatGPT to create a vulnerable web application to practice hacking in a lab environment. Now, the good part, and I'll talk about the good part and also the part that would require work for ChatGPT to be a great learning tool for cybersecurity. Now, when we're talking about penetration testing or application vulnerabilities, the source of this vulnerabilities most of the time is the source code that is used to create the applications. So if we can create a vulnerable web application, analyze the different vulnerabilities, then we can have a better understanding of how to test vulnerabilities in real production environments, and also make recommendations on how to remediate them. Now in this video, I'll talk about how to get started on creating a vulnerable web application for some of the well-known critical severity vulnerabilities and also learn how to fix those vulnerabilities at a code level. It would just be an introductory level on how to get started because the scope of this video is how to use ChatGPT and what would be the best practice based on my experience. Now, you can get the best use of ChatGPT to get a task completion. Also, yeah, connecting the dots with ChatGPT falls short. So in this demonstration, I'll be using for the backend Spring Boot, and for the front end, I'll be using React. So I'll use the different IDEs. That way, it will be clear. The backend would use Eclipse, and the front end would use Node, Visual Studio. Obviously, you need to have Node installed, and I'm not going to go through that because that's not the scope of this video. Uh, Now, but let's get it started. So, first thing is everything that you do in here, it depends on how detailed you are when uh, asking, giving a prompt to ChatGPT. Let me give you an example. So I'm going to go ahead in here since I'm going to be using uh, Spring. I'm going to be using Spring, what's called controller. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT, give me an example of SSRS Spring Boot vulnerable controller. So it's going to give me a code for a vulnerable controller. The reason why it is vulnerable is because it's using get mapping, as you can see here on the code, and there is no input validation. Whatever is being pushed as a parameter from a URL without any input validation, it is actually being passed. Well, the problem with that is somebody were to actually uh, enter a different URL than what is intended, we would have what's called server-side request forgery. So far, I've actually used, for the most part, ChatGPT and also a little bit of research to create a vulnerable web application. And this is what it looks like. Now, the different menu items would have a different vulnerabilities. For instance, if you go to this page, it would have contact us, but this functionality by itself is vulnerable. And now I'll demo that in a minute. And this says also send an email. This would have a different vulnerability. Now, some of the vulnerabilities that are being demonstrated on this application is one is server-side request forgery. The other one is directory traversal, XXE attacks, remote code execution, SQL injection, NoSQL injection attacks using MongoDB, and command injection. Now, I plan on adding more vulnerabilities to make it fully functional. The reason why I'm doing that is because I feel like there's not a whole lot of applications, uh, a lot of the vulnerable applications to practice on. They using the same vulnerability over and over again, and I feel like maybe I need a different uh, application. Also give me a detailed information of what is going on with it on the code side, and I feel like people could use the same practice and learn a whole lot. With that being said, let's go ahead and go to ChatGPT. Like I said, it would give you the controller. All I have to do is actually, I need to come in. The way I did, obviously, the first thing I was using something called Spring Initializer and create the package and generate it, maybe add one dependency. Now, I'm not going to add all the dependencies required because what you can do when it comes to the best practice, in my opinion, is when you creating an application like this, it's best to, let's say, if I ask, ChatGPT, give me a code for a vulnerability out of controller, and it gave me that. By the way, this is not gonna work. I had to change a whole lot of stuff, which is still, in my opinion, still a great tool because it does save you a lot of boilerplate coding. But yeah, you need to change a lot of things to actually make it work. Now, once you actually ask ChatGPT this question, what you can do is you can give it a prompt saying share the pom.xml, which is the main one of required files for a Spring application. You Because that's where the dependencies are going to be listed. So once it gives you this, you can just say uh, SSRF vulnerable controller, give me pom.xml, or give you pom.xml. Once you create your project and import it to Eclipse, what you can do is actually you can go to your pom.xml and replace everything in here. And uh, most of the time you might have, like I said, this is not a straightforward copy and paste thing. You're gonna have to have some level of understanding how the code works, how you can fix it, depending on what you're using. If you're using Maven, Groovy, or something. But I don't think it's gonna be that hard. ChatGPT can take care of majority of the work for you. And as you can see here, I created multiple vulnerable controllers, and I'm actually able to check to see uh, those vulnerabilities exist. Now, the second thing, what you can obviously, if you want a fully functional application, it needs to have a front end. Now, you can ask ChatGPT the same question again. You can say create front end using React to make a call to the backend endpoint, a call which is the controller's name. I call this other vulnerable controller. Give me the dependencies required. This was what I was referring to. Like when you're creating, whether it is for the backend or the front end, always ask for the dependency information so you don't have to refactor your code. Because when I started was this what happened was I write my code with one project, let's say Spring Initializer. I'm using Spring Boot 3.4.3, and ChatGPT might share a code that is written with a different Spring Boot version, and the code's not going to work. So the best way to avoid this is actually right off ask a question, specific question like what version it is using. That way you can actually update all your code, and it should work fine for the most part. So like I said, I asked the question and also be specific. I noticed that when it comes to ChatGPT, I don't know, for some odd reason, it might just be me, but when it's using the Tailwind framework, a lot of the code doesn't work as it should, the CSS code. So I specifically asked, don't use Tailwind, it's actually use Bootstrap. Bootstrap works most of the time. I never had any problems with it. But yeah, I give you directions on how to create that as well. This is a React command. You're gonna come in VS Code and go to the folder that you want to create it. You can run npx create React app and you React the app name and change the directory, install all the dependencies. And it will also give you component by component code. Now, some of it might not work or the front end might not look great. And again, you can prompt it saying, remove this component from the front end and add this component from the front end. And it works fine for the most part. And this is what my application looks like. And as you can see, this different components have different vulnerabilities. Let me kind of demonstrate that. I have Burp Suite open. If you notice, is actually the traffic is coming from my site. And if you notice, let me just give you one example. If you this one is making the page is making a call using what's called spell expression, and this is one vulnerability that could allow remote code execution because the front end is using the expression language, and you can change this to something so you can actually execute remote. You can run a remote code execution. I can actually send it to a repeater right now and actually change this to let's say, let me get the command that way I can save some time. and you can send it. One of the things that happening is it's gonna do remote code execution, and this actually would open up calculator in your device. So as you can see, it opened up calculator. So that's remote code execution. So yeah, the vulnerabilities work and they work great, and the front end works. So you could use ChatGPT for a lot of stuff like that, and um, create your own uh, application, vulnerable application, so you can learn a whole lot more to see what's going on back in the back end, what the source code is, and also the one nice thing I like about ChatGPT is actually it would tell you right off there is this vulnerability, how do you fix it, and all that stuff. Now, with that being said, let me talk about the back part of it. So if we look at, let me give you an example. This is a vulnerability on NoSQL injection attack on MongoDB. Now, it'll give you instructions, specifically instructions how to create a database and all that stuff, all the great. But when it comes to working exploit, that is something is it still needs a whole lot of work. By that, well, let me demonstrate that. So it had me create all the database and all that stuff. Will give you the query. That's great. Now, if you noticed inside the database, there is a collection called messages, and the messages have what's called objects and object ID and private. Now, the private true are the ones that can be accessed using a public API, and the private false are the ones that can be accessed using public API. So this lab is actually, this part of the lab is to demonstrate uh, NoSQL injection. And if you noticed that the payload that it gave me is private is equals false, but this is not going to work because if it's private is false, you can actually access it using the public API. So you don't need to do any injections. So I noticed that and right off, and I asked that question again, ChatGPT, uh, should private be shouldn't private be true to get all the messages? Private false, this means it's public anyway. It says you're absolutely right, and it corrected it. So I feel like this is actually, a very simple payload. Should have got it right off, but so these are some of the things you need to work on. So it's not gonna be perfect copy and pasting, but you can definitely use ChatGPT to create some vulnerable web application where you can exploit it in your home environment and also learn a whole lot more about the backend vulnerabilities and also what you can do uh, and to improve your skill set. And that is what I want to share today. And I'll be sharing follow-up videos on how to exploit the different vulnerabilities, and also I'll be sharing the source code for this site, for this application, so people can actually use it as well once I'm completely done with it. And the other thing I did is actually just to make it more. I didn't want to run all the applications on local host. So I created a separate. I mean, I deployed it to different VMs, Ubuntu VMs, and that's what I'm doing. Back end, back end, and front end, and everything. I packaged the application as a jar on the back end. On the front end, obviously, is um, easier to deploy on a lot of on a lot of servers, but it's a React application. So that's what I want to share, and I'll be sharing the rest of the stuff on future videos. Thank you.